Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of upstream oil and gas, specifically how the regulatory landscape is shifting and what that means, for the future of the industry. You send over some really interesting reports and analyses on this, and we're here to kind of help you cut through all the jargon and really understand what's important.
Yeah, we're going to break it all down and highlight the key takeaways, the things that are most relevant to you.
Perfect. So, before we get into the weeds of all these policy changes, I'd love to get your take on what your sources are saying about just the overall state of the industry. Like, what are some of the big overarching trends that jumped out at you?
Well, one thing that I found really interesting is the whole digital transformation thing. And we're not just talking broad strokes here. Your sources actually highlight some really specific examples of how AI and machine learning are being used to optimize all sorts of stuff from production rates to cost management.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you give us like a concrete example of what that looks like in practice?
Absolutely. One of your reports mentions this company in the Permian Basin. They're using AI to predict equipment failures
Wow.
before they happen.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so they can schedule maintenance proactively, reduce downtime,
Smart.
huge cost savings. So
Mhm.
it's really cool. It's a very targeted application of AI, and it's having a real impact on their bottom line.
That's a perfect example of how technology is really changing the game. And speaking of the Permian Basin, your sources all seem to agree that it's still like the hotbed of activity. What are they saying about the outlook there?
It seems that these new pipelines, like that Matterhorn Express pipeline you highlighted, they're finally easing the bottlenecks that have plaguing the region.
Right.
So it allows the producers to get their product to market more efficiently, which is
Mhm.
good news for them, obviously, but also for consumers, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
More stable energy prices.
So it sounds like infrastructure is really playing a key role in the Permian's continued success. Now, what about the global picture? Are your sources painting a similar picture of growth and innovation?
Interestingly, yeah, there seems to be this renewed focus on unconventional oil and gas resources,
Okay.
not just in the U.S., but globally.
Interesting.
Yeah, your sources talk about increased activity in places like Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Algeria. All these countries are looking to tap into those unconventional resources to meet their growing energy needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. As the global demand for energy keeps rising, it's natural to see countries exploring all their options. It sounds like unconventional oil and gas is going to keep playing a pretty significant role in the global energy mix for the foreseeable future. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the regulatory side of things. Your sources point to some pretty major shakeups under the Trump administration. What would you say is like the main thrust of these policy changes?
It really seems like the administration's primary focus is on just speeding up energy projects across the board. They're aiming to accelerate permitting and approval processes for everything from pipelines to drilling permits, you name it.
And how are they going about doing that? What are some of the like specific actions they've taken?
They've implemented a bunch of executive orders, right, aimed at streamlining the regulatory process.
Yeah.
Your sources mention things like limiting the scope of environmental reviews,
Oh,
giving emergency powers to fast-track certain projects.
wow.
And they've even revoked some of the previous administration's climate-focused policies.
Okay, so that sounds like a pretty dramatic shift. What are the potential implications of these changes, both for the industry and like for the environment?
Well, it's a very complex issue, and your sources definitely present a range of perspectives.
Mm.
On the one hand, these changes could lead to a surge in energy production,
Yeah.
potentially lower prices for consumers, more jobs created. On the other hand, there are some concerns that these expedited approvals could come at a cost, right?
Of course, yeah.
Environmental protection.
Right.
Some of your sources actually raise concerns about the legality of some of these actions. They bring up this thing called the Chevron doctrine, this legal principle that might limit how far federal agencies can go in reinterpreting existing laws.
So, for someone who's not like a legal expert, could you break down like what the Chevron doctrine is and why it matters in this context?
Sure. So the Chevron doctrine basically says that courts should defer to federal agencies when it comes to interpreting laws that might be a little bit ambiguous, as long as those interpretations are, reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
In the context of these regulatory changes, it means that if a court finds that the administration's interpretation of environmental laws is like unreasonable or goes beyond their authority, those changes could be overturned.
Ah, I see. So even though these changes are happening really quickly, there's still a chance they could be challenged and potentially reversed down the road. That's a lot of uncertainty for companies trying to navigate this whole new landscape. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why it's more important than ever for companies to be, you know, agile, adaptable. They need to be able to adjust their strategies as the regulatory environment evolves, which can be a real challenge for sure.
And on top of that, they need to be mindful of potential legal challenges, right? And the possibility of policy reversal.
Oh, absolutely. It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
But, let's not forget about the opportunities here.
Right. One of the most talked about opportunities in your sources is the lifting of the pause on those LNG export licenses. You specifically highlighted the approval of that Commonwealth LNG project down in Louisiana. What's the significance of that development?
Well, it's a clear sign that the U.S. is putting a renewed focus on, LNG exports. The Commonwealth LNG project, it's huge. They're planning a capacity of 9.5 million tons per year. They're targeting markets in Asia, Europe, where demand for LNG is just skyrocketing.
That's fascinating. What kind of impact could this have on the global LNG market?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, it definitely has the potential to kind of shift the dynamics, right?
Right.
The U.S. has become a major LNG player in recent years. This move could really solidify that position.
So it sounds like companies that are well positioned to capitalize on this could see some serious growth. But as we were talking about earlier, it's important to be cautious.
Oh, yeah. Don't get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
The LNG market is complex,
Yeah.
a lot of volatility, so, companies need to be strategic.
Right.
Make sure they're not overextending themselves.
So for a listener who's trying to make sense of all of this, what would you say is the main takeaway here? Is this like a time of uncertainty or is it a time of opportunity in the LNG space?
It's really a bit of both, to be honest. There's definitely potential for growth, especially with that export ban lifted.
Yeah.
But there are risks, too.
Right.
Market oversupply, price fluctuations,
Of course.
companies that can navigate all that strategically are going to be the ones that succeed.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about some of the big picture trends, the overall regulatory landscape. Now, let's maybe dive into some of the more specific considerations for companies that are operating in this space. What are the key strategic questions that they should be asking themselves right now?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to really understand this new regulatory landscape.
Okay.
And I mean, going beyond just like the headlines, really digging into the details of those executive orders, the policy changes. They need to figure out, how are these things actually going to be implemented and what does it mean for their specific operations?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not enough to just know that changes are happening. You got to understand the nuances and how they could affect your business.
Exactly. And they also need to keep a close eye on any legal challenges that might pop up. As we were talking about before, that Chevron doctrine could really determine the fate of some of these policies in the long run.
Right. So it's important for companies to be aware of the legal landscape, too. What about the market side of things? What are some of the key market trends they should be watching?
Well, we've already talked about that potential growth in the LNG market, but they also need to pay attention to what's happening domestically, especially in the Permian. Your sources, they all point out that the Permian is still a huge driver of U.S. oil and gas production.
Okay.
So, understanding the dynamics there is crucial.
So they need to be thinking both globally and domestically. What about the financial side of things? How are all these regulatory changes, market changes, how is it affecting investor sentiment?
That's a great question. Your sources suggest that investors are kind of taking a wait-and-see approach right now. Waiting to see how these changes play out over time. They're looking for companies that show they're agile, they're adaptable,
Right.
and that they really get this evolving regulatory landscape.
So it's not just about chasing profits anymore.
Exactly. It's about showing a solid strategy that can weather any potential storms.
And on top of that, they need to be mindful of ESG.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Investors are increasingly focused on environmental, social, and governance factors.
Right. And ESG, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the term, it basically encompasses a company's commitment to sustainability, ethical practices, social responsibility, all of that. It's super important now, especially for investors who are really looking to align their portfolios with their values.
It is. So for those companies operating in this upstream oil and gas space, it's not just about maximizing production.
Right.
It's also about the environment, their relationships with communities, their governance practices, all of it.
Wow, it sounds like they're being pulled in so many different directions. How can they possibly balance all these competing priorities?
It's definitely a challenge. But the ones that can do it successfully, those are the companies that are going to thrive. And that's where strategic planning is so crucial.
So what exactly does strategic planning look like in this context?
It means taking that long-term view.
Mm.
What are the potential challenges?
Right.
What are the opportunities down the road?
Yeah.
And then develop a roadmap that actually aligns with their overall goals and their values.
So it's about having a clear vision, a well-defined strategy, and the flexibility to kind of adapt as things change.
Exactly. And being proactive,
Yeah.
not just reactive. They need to anticipate regulatory changes, market shifts, evolving investor expectations.
It's a tall order, but it sounds like those that can rise to the challenge are going to be in a really good position to succeed in this industry.
And on that note, I think it might be helpful to actually dive into a specific example from your sources, one that really highlights this whole strategic planning thing.
Yeah, let's do that. What are you thinking?
How about that National Energy Dominance Council? You mentioned it a lot, and it seems like a pretty key driver of the Trump administration's energy agenda.
Perfect. Let's dig into that next.
So this National Energy Dominance Council, or NEDC, it's a really interesting thing. It's basically a task force, right, within the White House. And they're completely focused on streamlining regulations, for all those energy projects.
It sounds like it could be a pretty big deal for those companies that are working in the upstream space. What are some of their specific goals? What are they actually trying to do?
Well, it seems like they're taking a very proactive approach. Your sources say they're not just waiting around for problems.
Yeah.
They're out there looking for ways to remove roadblocks, make it easier for energy companies to, just get things done.
Can you give us an example? What kind of roadblocks are we talking about here?
Well, they seem to be focusing on a few key areas. Like your sources mention things like streamlining the permits for pipelines, reducing regulations on drilling, and they're also working to open up new areas, for exploration and development.
Wow. Sounds like they're really trying to shake things up. But what about the potential downsides? I mean, your sources also mentioned some concerns about this approach, right?
Yeah, for sure. Some critics argue that all this deregulation could end up hurting the environment. They're worried that fast-tracking all these projects could lead to cutting corners,
Yeah, I see what you mean.
potentially putting those sensitive ecosystems at risk.
So it sounds like it's kind of a balancing act, right?
Right.
On the one hand, you want to promote energy independence, economic growth, all of that, but you also have to protect the environment.
Exactly. And that's where that Chevron doctrine we talked about earlier comes back into play.
Hmm.
Remember, the courts could decide if the NEDC's actions are, actually legal. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the courts.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like the NEDC is a powerful force in this whole regulatory landscape, but there are definitely critics and potential problems. For companies in this space, it's got to be important to keep up with everything they're doing
Oh, for sure.
and be ready to adapt to those changes.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, your sources also highlighted this growing importance of what they call ESG factors for investors.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and why it seems to be so important now?
Sure. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's basically this framework for evaluating a company, right? And you're going beyond just the financial stuff. You're looking at environmental impact, social responsibility, their governance practices, and it's becoming a really big deal for investors who want to invest in companies that, match their values.
Can you give us some specific examples of what these ESG factors might look like in the upstream oil and gas industry?
Absolutely. So on the environmental side, investors are looking at things like the company's carbon footprint. What are they doing to reduce emissions? Are they committed to sustainability? On the social side, it's things like their relationships with local communities, their track record on human rights, workplace safety. And then on the governance side, it's stuff like diversity on their board, executive compensation, are they transparent and accountable, all of that.
It sounds like it's a pretty comprehensive framework. Why has it become such a hot topic for investors?
I think it's a few things. First, people are becoming more aware of climate change, right? All those other environmental challenges. Investors are starting to realize that these issues can really affect a company's bottom line, potential liabilities, lost revenue, all that.
Yeah, that makes sense. If a company is super invested in fossil fuels, their assets could end up being worthless as the world moves to cleaner energy.
Exactly. And then there's this growing demand for sustainable investing. More and more investors, especially younger folks, want to support companies that are doing good in the world. It's not just about making money anymore. It's about aligning your money with your values.
So it sounds like these oil and gas companies need to pay attention to this ESG stuff if they want to keep investors happy.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about looking good. There's actually a lot of evidence that shows companies with strong ESG performance do better financially too.
So it's not just about doing good, it's about doing well financially as well.
Right. The two are connected. Companies that are on top of those ESG issues are often just better managed overall, and they're better prepared for the challenges and opportunities of today's economy.
So for these upstream companies, ESG is not just like checking a box,
Yeah,
it's essential to their
well,
strategy.
exactly. It's got to be part of who they are
Yeah.
from the top down.
Well said. So we've talked about this regulatory landscape, the outlook for the market, and now this whole idea of ESG. It sounds like it's creating both challenges and opportunities for this industry.
For sure. And one of the biggest challenges is just staying ahead of the curve, right?
Yeah.
Anticipating those changes and being ready to adapt.
It seems like being able to adapt is key here. What can these companies actually do to make sure they're, ready to navigate all this complexity?
Well, one thing is to build a culture of innovation. Encourage people to experiment, embrace new technologies, and be willing to challenge how things have always been done.
That makes sense. But how do you actually create that kind of environment?
One thing is to break down those silos, and encourage people to work together, have different departments collaborate. Another is to create dedicated teams that are focused on new technologies and finding innovative solutions. And it's important to create a culture where it's okay to fail. You know, Failure is just an opportunity to learn.
Yeah, I agree. That fear of failure can really kill creativity.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole data and analytics thing. Data is so important now, right?
Yeah.
Companies that can use data effectively are going to be in a much better position to make good decisions and stay ahead of the game.
And that's especially true in this industry. It's so complex, so many moving parts.
Exactly. And then there's the whole talent thing, attracting and keeping those top performers. You got to create a work environment that's challenging, rewarding, and aligns with what those younger workers are looking for.
Right, because the workforce is changing and companies need to keep up. What are some of the things that, younger people are looking for in a job?
Well, they want to work for a company that's purpose-driven, that's making a positive impact. They want opportunities to grow and develop their skills. And they want flexibility. They want to be able to work in a way that fits their life.
So these companies have a lot to think about if they want to attract the best talent.
They do.
Yeah.
And they also need to be proactive about engaging with all their stakeholders.
Yeah.
Investors, regulators, communities, the public, everyone. Being transparent and communicating is so important for building trust.
It's not just about doing the right thing, it's about showing that you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. And that means being open about the challenges, being honest about the opportunities, and working with people to find solutions.
So we've talked about this need for innovation, the data, the talent, and engaging with stakeholders. It sounds like it's all connected.
It is. And this industry is going through some big changes, lots of uncertainty, but there's also a lot of opportunity. The companies that can adapt, that can innovate, and that really embrace these ESG principles, those are the ones that are going to shape the future of this whole sector.
That's a great summary of what we've talked about today.
And maybe something for your listeners to think about. Given everything we've discussed, those regulatory changes, global trends, new technologies, and what people expect from companies now, what do you think will make an oil and gas company successful in the future?
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring, all the ins and outs of the upstream oil and gas industry, looking at how regulations are changing, what companies need to be thinking about, and, what it all means for everyone, really.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. I mean, this is an industry that's at a turning point. It's facing all these opportunities, but also a lot of uncertainty at the same time.
You've given us a lot to think about. As we wrap up this deep dive today, I'd love to kind of bring it all together. What would you say is the overarching takeaway here?
Well, the upstream oil and gas industry is definitely, in a state of change right now. Things are moving fast. The regulatory landscape is changing, and it's being driven by, politics, economic factors, and what investors are demanding. It's a lot for companies to juggle.
You've talked a lot about the need for companies to be agile and adaptable. It's almost like, I don't know, like they're trying to hit a moving target, constantly adjusting to keep up.
That's a great way to put it. And the companies that can adapt quickly, the ones that embrace innovation and can anticipate what's coming next, those are the ones that are going to be successful in this new era of energy. It's not enough to react. You have to be proactive and stay ahead of the curve.
So being able to think ahead and plan strategically is super important. And it's not just about making money anymore, right? Companies have to show that they're committed to doing things sustainably, to those ESG principles we talked about, if they want to be seen as legitimate.
Exactly. Investors and the public are watching closely, and they care about a company's environmental impact, how they treat people, and how they govern themselves. It's not enough to just focus on profits. Companies have to show that they're being responsible, that they care about the environment, and that they want to create value for everybody, not just their shareholders.
It sounds like it's all about balance, right? Finding that sweet spot between economic growth, taking care of the environment, and being socially responsible.
That's the key, but it's definitely a challenge. Companies have to work hard to achieve that balance if they want to be truly sustainable in the long run.
And we've seen how technology is playing a huge role in helping companies do just that. From AI that can predict when equipment needs maintenance, to data analytics that can help companies optimize their operations and reduce their environmental impact, technology is changing everything about how the upstream oil and gas industry works.
I couldn't agree more. Embracing those digital tools and using data effectively is going to be essential for any company that wants to stay competitive.
So, as we wrap up, what's one final thought? What's that one big question we can leave our listeners with?
Well, given all that we've talked about today, all those changes happening, the trends we're seeing, the new technologies, and what people are demanding, what role do you think the upstream oil and gas industry will play in the energy landscape of the future? What do you think?
That's a great question, and one that I'm sure will generate a lot of discussion. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of upstream oil and gas. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.